welcome to the Tether's World for our second in this term's TWED Talks. Tonight we're actually honored to have Alexei Bulazel give our first undergrad TWED talk. He's going to talk, as you can see, he's going to talk about the internship that he did with the government this past summer. Just a couple logistical notes. Number one, this is being recorded and being live cast on the internet, so just keep that in mind. If you make any comments or whatever, you are being recorded. The other thing is that I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet. This is purely for record-keeping RPI's expense system. We just have to keep kind of a note on how many people attended and who attended, that sort of thing. So I'm going to pass this sheet around with it. And I believe our next TWED talk is actually next week. We're scheduled for our next TWED talk next week. If you ever have any questions, it's tw.rpi.edu/web/TWED, TWED is our schedule. And we're always looking for speakers for the coming term. We have a full docket this term, which we're really fortunate. So without further ado, here's Alexei.
Hi, so my name is Alexei Bulazel. Many of you know me. I am a junior pursuing a dual major in computer science and IT, and I've been a member of this research lab for a few years now. So thanks to John for suggesting a title, an instance of Data.gov, or what I did in my summer vacation. So what I did at Data.gov, I built a semantic instance hub, redesigned semantic developer and open data government communities, open government communities. Those are web communities to coordinate developers working in those areas of interest. And I also helped organize the International Open Government Data Conference. What I'm here to talk about tonight is the Instance Hub. So here's an overview of the talk. I'm going to go over what Instance Hub is, to start with, then demo the technology with the RPI Instance Hub created by Dominic, and what I actually built. And then we'll talk about the technology used in Instance Hub. And please interrupt me at any time. I'm covering kind of a lot of different things. If you're not familiar with technology, please feel free to interrupt me. So, what is an instance hub? An instance hub presents an authoritative instance of an entity with a URI for people and machines to look at. So an entity can really be anything. It's a concept or a real world, something in the real world, just something that we can talk about and we want to represent online in the semantic web. So an instance hub gives us a whole set of common concepts or things with URIs that we can use to point at those very specific things. And when developers are creating linked data applications, they can point at an instance hub to get authoritative references for any given entity. And it can also contain links to other instances through Alexei Bulazel, so we can talk about something like the Department of Justice and say this is Alexei Bulazel's DBpedia as it is to Freebase. It's the same concept we're talking about. It's the same idea of Department of Justice. Also, we can provide metadata. So that means for Department of Justice, we can say it has Eric Holder as the leader, it has this logo, it has this budget, this number of employees, it is a federal government body, and so forth. And we could also use this easy URI scheme for referencing these entities, and I'm going to go through the value of all these points. So uses, again, we can point at things. So when someone says Department of Health, we don't know what exactly that is. That could be New York State Department of Health, it could be the Department of Health in the UK, in America. What we do is we point at a URI in an instance hub, or wherever, but the idea of an instance hub is to provide a common set of URIs we'll point to, and we can disambiguate what exactly we're talking about. And they also assist in data set conversion. So that's a big topic of interest in research here at RPI, is converting non-semantic data to rich semantic data, or RDF. And when we use an instance hub, we can link to one instance hub, like the Data.gov instance hub that I created, and that gives you a bridge. All of a sudden, you're on a linked data cloud, you're linked to DBpedia, to Freebase, RPI. So if you have one connection to one kind of node that branches out, you're connected to all the nodes that node branches out to. If that makes sense. And you can also get metadata that can be incorporated, such as who is the leader of this organization, what is their logo, what is their budget. So here's an example of an instance from RPI. This is Arkansas, about Arkansas rather, and this is from Dominic's instance hub. So here you can see we present same as. This is HTML representation, so we don't have the specific semantic properties. This is actually the same as to these media resources, Arkansas, and freebase on there, about. That means they're all the same thing. It's all this concept of Arkansas, this thing, Arkansas. There's a state flag as well. But it doesn't have to just be government things. And one of the newest instance hubs that Dominic created presents chemical data for toxic chemicals. So 13uter.edu. That, it's a representation of it, chemical structure, and then same as it's linked to all these other concepts of food ID. So again, instance hub can be about anything. And John suggested a fade-in of Dominic's face.
Why?
Page.
This is terrible.
I was going over, he said, put Dominic.
I am instance hub.
Yes, Dominic has really led this initiative in building these instance hubs, and it was a huge help for me as I worked at Data.gov. So I'm not going to read those all off, but a variety of things are being presented at RPI, and you can really present anything that's a set of something common. You can present a Star Wars characters instance hub if you wanted. So there's a real need for authoritative URIs in the semantic web. A lot of groups link back to DBpedia. You see it's a central node that everyone's linking to. So DBpedia is really, it's Wikipedia that's taken and converted into semantic format. So Wikipedia data is taken and converted into semantic RDF. And because Wikipedia is such a large knowledge base, there's just a huge amount of data that is then therefore available on DBpedia because it's the semantic version of Wikipedia. However, DBpedia is plagued by kind of patchy use of proper ontologies. I actually tried to use DBpedia this summer in constructing my instance hub, and I found that certain agencies were not classified as government agencies. They were classified as government employer, and there was no link between government agency and government employer, or defense organization or military organization, with no link to the fact that a military organization is also a government organization. So it's very, very patchy, but it is used. So there is a real need for other alternative centers of authority. So Data.gov would project out an instance hub because Data.gov is part of the U.S. government and is an authority within the government on what are the names and what are the agencies within this government. DBpedia isn't the only central hub. Here in there's also GeoNames, it's very popular. Here you see the ACM. And these are all roughly split up by kind of sectors. This is open government, and this is where the Data.gov instance hub would go. But you can see science is over here. This looks like medical data. Over here is like music. But all of these things converge to DBpedia, which is, again, not the best solution. So serving up agency URIs from Data.gov means that Data.gov can be an authoritative URI provider, can provide these authoritative semantic notions or semantic concepts of these agencies. Data.gov is already a center of linked open government data and open government at large, so it's a natural fit to have Data.gov extending its reach into this instance hub area and being a provider of authoritative instances. As I mentioned before, it's very useful for linked open government data applications. And Data.gov can also provide names of agencies as it knows them. So one thing that actually came up in my internship at the end, so I was asked by the director of Data.gov, presenting what I did. He said, we have these names for these agencies. What if OPM, the Office of Personnel and Management, says, well, we think that agency is a different name? And that's actually a real concern that the director of Data.gov had. So OPM, as far as we know, has no plans to release a semantic instance hub or even get into the linked open data or semantic world.
If there is competing definitions of authority, is there any adjudication process that decides which one is more authoritative?
So I wouldn't really know if there's an adjudication process, but what there is, and what I was about to say, is that you can do linking. So you can say this is same as. So if they claim that Department of Justice is called U.S. Department of Justice or United States versus U.S., what you can do is say, well, that's the same as, that's the same concept. I guess we'd really fall on developers to choose who's authoritative, and it would also fall in inter-agency negotiations on what's appropriate for Data.gov to be writing, what's appropriate for OPM. But if that happened, and that was a question posed to me by the director of Data.gov, if that happened, all you have to do is say, well, these are same as, and just go through and do a matching. And a lot of that could actually be automated, doing that matching. And some of it might have to be manual, but you only have about, in the hundreds of agencies. So it would be a big deal. Do you have any ideas, John?
Well, no, I think you gave a great explanation of that. It might not be symmetrical. So, for example, you might have, say, a Data.gov instance hub, which links out to some other government entity's instance hub who decided that they were authoritative, but they might not link back to it. Okay, and similarly, one of the examples that Alexei gave was the chemical example. If you could squint, you could see that there was, in addition to our listing on the RPI instance hub, there were same as to how ChemSpider's system for referencing that chemical, PubChem's system for doing that, DBpedia's, Freebase's. So there's all these alternates. None of those are linking back to ours, but ours is valuable in the sense that it provides all these equivalent links to all of those. One of the advantages of which you saw is that that chemical symbol, that chemical representation came from one of those. So it shows the value of that symbol with the, similar with the flag, similar with other things. And so what the developer community is going to do is kind of embrace these authoritative sources that are also useful. And ultimately that's what Data.gov's mission is about, is not just supplying data, but making that data incredibly useful. Creating a set of tools and infrastructure to make it really useful. Great. So.
And with regard, that's something I was going to address a little later, but I'll bring up now. It's not the instance hub currently doesn't support this feature, but a future improvement to be made would be linking instance hub instances of agencies with the data sets that they've supplied to Data.gov. So you would have the Department of Agriculture, and then you would have a listing of all the data sets, on wheat production and whatever that Department of Agriculture has released to Data.gov. And that's not something that's currently implemented, partially because it's a lot of work, but also Data.gov doesn't really have a semantic listing of data sets. If they had that, it would be very easy, almost trivial to run a Sparkle query against that and just spit out all data sets that have been linked or came from this agency. But a really important parallel kind of goal with constructing Instance Hub and projecting out authoritative instances of agencies is having a Data.gov vocabulary to express information from these agencies. So the point of this Instance Hub is to be an authoritative source from the government. And because it will be an authoritative source hopefully for all government agencies on the semantic web, there's a certain clout implied by that position. So Data.gov would have the ability to use its own vocabulary term to talk about these agencies. So on the semantic web, we say that these different entities have these properties. So we say the USDA has this logo, has property, and then logo. So the vocabulary lets you define that kind of verb, that predicate. So rather than saying this is FOF logo, which is what I currently say, FOF is a very widely used ontology for expressing relations between individuals and organizations. But unfortunately, FOF's predicates don't mean a lot. When you say FOF organization, it's just this very rough idea of an organization, whatever organization could mean. It doesn't mean government organization or anything like that. It's just this very rough idea, very, very vague. Data.gov could define specific relationships for what it sees in its work. So when it says agency, that can imply it's a government agency, it can imply it's a US agency, all kinds of things like that. And it also provides a common language. So if other agencies decided to release linked data on their own, if USDA came out and released their own linked data, they could use Data.gov's vocabulary to talk about it, because Data.gov would be this kind of central point of semantic technology in the US government and be a central provider of both these authoritative instances and the language we use to talk about them. So that's work going on right now. I know Professor Hembler is involved in that. A number of people from HHS and all across the government are coming together and figuring this out. Unfortunately, was not available by the time I left my internship. I'm not sure what the timeline for getting an actual vocab out is, but
Weeks.
when one becomes available, converting the data to use the data vocab is almost trivial. Less than an hour of work. So I want to talk about URI design right now. So when we have these URIs that point and represent these instances online, we want to have common standards for how we design the URIs. And I just actually took this from a page, the London page. It really is a great description of how it works. If we have here, we want to talk about some concept from the EPA. At RPI, we can represent like this: log.tw.rpi.eu, ID, EPA.gov, and whatever that concept is. So that could be a toxic chemical, that could be EPA processing facility, whatever they want to talk about. And when EPA decides to actually release some data, they can use a very similar URI scheme, and it's very easy to port information from one to another, and to figure out that when we have this URI, that this is in fact same as this. It's really just a matter of string manipulation, just copying the ID somewhere else and shift it around, and you'll have this same URI. So it's a very easy way of having common standards for URIs to refer to concepts. And you want to have URIs that, as we'll see later, that show kind of a hierarchy of national level to state to agency. So we might say US/NY/ Department of Corrective Facilities, to talk about the New York State Department of Corrective Facilities, which is part of, New York is part of the US. So they kind of follow a hierarchy. And these are some example identifiers here. So this is a suggestion from RPI. Rob?
It seems like a specific hierarchy would necessarily imply one perspective that you're looking at things from. Would you possibly have a second alternate URI that has a different, perhaps non-geographical level organization that then points back towards the primary one?
You could do that. It might pose a little bit of trouble in terms of writing your queries. You might want to implement it as just kind of a page that redirects you, because your URI is what we're talking about. That is how it's represented online. That is the place that it is found online. So if you had two places to find something, it would be a bit awkward. So you might have one that could redirect to another. I mean, do you have anything?
Well, yes, it's possible to have multiples and then establish the relationship. The point of having a particular pattern for creating these is primarily driven by the government, by the people within the government that are trying to establish best practices. There's always been a tension. There's no need for URIs to have this sort of structure. URIs can be just opaque identifiers. But from a reality standpoint, from a system development standpoint, and kind of just from a human interaction standpoint, sitting in meetings talking about things, it's really useful to have a repeatable sort of pattern that people can follow. And so we created this as a suggestion to the people at Data.gov as a way to pattern that. It's similar to some things that have been proposed in the UK's Data.gov.uk project. They provide some uniqueness based on the way they structure things over there. So there is there's nothing to say that every government in the world has to be modeled in this way. Okay, this is based on our conversations with people within the U.S. government and how it works. UK government is a little bit different, and there's some personal biases to some of the people that are involved in that in terms of predictability. Okay, one of the great debates is, if I've got such a pattern for constructing a URI, what should happen if I make up one that doesn't exist? You know, so anyways, but Alexei is right. It's very important to have canonical URIs for things, but it's not impossible to have relationships that can be disambiguated or just simply clarified.
So just some examples that kind of walk you through how these are designed. You know, the base, and as I said, the hierarchy: ID, US, Fed, agency. This could also be Fed building, like a top of government buildings, and then name and subname, and you could have recursive more subnames if you had more sub-agencies. So an example of one I actually found in my instance hub is reference.data.gov. So this is the reference page of data.gov. ID Fed, US Fed, agency, Health and Human Services, and then Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So this is the CDC. This is the URI in the instance hub for the CDC.
There's one correction that I wanted to make. You kind of referred to it could be a concept. Okay, the actual that's a debatable thing. You know, these IDs are meant to be sort of entities, and there's a possibility of having a whole separate space, which is concept / whatever, and concepts used within a federal agency, which is actually something that they do over in the UK for theirs. So they sort of create, in addition to URIs for real live things, also there's a pattern for constructing URIs that refer to concepts in use, which is an interesting thing. And so we as we're just creating the data of government, we can refer to concepts. But go ahead, before I introduce more entropy.
So we talked about URI meanings. This is the URI for the Department of Health and Human Services. And this refers to it on the semantic web. This is when we're talking about Health and Human Services, we can point at that and say, this is what I'm talking about. But if we want to show somebody, if someone clicks on that link and wants to learn about Health and Human Services and disambiguate their knowledge of these words, health and human services, and disambiguate what they mean. Do they mean the US one or in other states or in other countries? You can click on that and get that information in HTML format rather than a semantic RDF format. So when we do that, we're redirected to the agency page, which is an HTML representation or projection of this RDF data for human consumption, whereas what's found at the just agency is the RDF representation.
But this is your implementation.
Yeah, and this is based off of what RPI did. So you could have. Yeah.
So why did you pick agency to put this topic there?
That was the recommendation from RPI through Professor Hendler. And that was kind of the official recommendation that I had, and I worked with Data.gov's developers, and they're one developer, and chose to use that as what's recommended by RPI, and really RPI is.
What are the alternatives in that space to agency? I think that's at the root of
the organization. I don't think it's much of an agency. I mean, it would be just choosing a different word.
What role does ID play?
Well, the ID is the highest level thing that we're referring to. An identifier, or an entity identifier for things. Okay, that's what the ID is there. And agency is the particular subpart under the federal government. I wish off the top of my head I knew what the alternatives were to agency.
So, I mean, you could also do agency representation, agency HTML, whatever word you choose, but you do want to have that because when you see an HTML page, that is not the data of the agency. That's an HTML representation of information about the agency. And concept negotiation allows us to get RDF data out of the instance hub, out of pages. So we can send a request to this page, agency, and then in our HTTP header we can say text turtle, application XML plus RDF, or application JSON, or any number of formats that are supported by the instance hub, and gets RDF data in that format. Otherwise, if we went to that URI and did not have a request header or a request header asking for HTML, we'd be redirected to the HTML agency page representation. So just some features of the instance that I built. It presents information on 170 plus agencies, including name, abbreviation, website, logo, parent agency, supports the HTML and the content negotiation, and it's 4-star data. So according to Mersley, that's when you use URIs to identify things so people can point at your stuff. And those are Tim's and Mersley's words. So I hope I haven't been too dry so far. I'm going to actually now show some stuff off. So I'm going to start off with Dominic's Totalist World page. And this is just to show kind of where I got my basis, or what I based my system on. So here we have a listing of agencies. Click on-
Actually, go back one, just to emphasize, so you've got different categories there, right?
Yep. Countries, states, toxic chemicals. The toxic chemicals is where I got the earlier molecular diagram I showed. And then we can go forward and learn about the architecture of the capital. Click on that. As you can see, this is an agency page. And this is a DBpedia abstract. So this is sourced through a Sparkle query to DBpedia. And presented as well as same as links, a link to the homepage. And a lot of this is done, it's done in PHP, but it also works through Drupal. Whereas the instance that I built is just raw PHP, no Drupal framework. So I'm going to go back to mine now. So this is the main page. You see this URI reference Data.gov. Unfortunately, it's not online yet. I've developed the site, but all the hosting for Data.gov is done by an external contractor who can be slower about getting things online. And unfortunately, the lead tech guy within Data.gov, the developer, left the agency and is now somewhere else. So I don't know if it'll ever actually get online, unfortunately. But the skills, and I'm going to contribute to RPIs. So this is all hosted locally. So if I choose a random agency, for example, CDC, as I mentioned earlier, I've done that. And I'm taken to the URI for the CDC. The home page is presented, so it's the parent agency with the link and name abbreviation. When I click on the parent agency link, I'm taken to the parent agency page, which also presents sub-agencies of that agency. And as you can see here, it's at agency page / Government Health and Human Services. If I were to go to agency, it would redirect me. It's an HTTP 303 redirect, which is the way on the semantic web we do a redirect like that. When someone has gone to a page that is Health and Human Services, and we want to redirect them to HTML representation, which is the 303. So behind the scenes, my Chrome browser received a 303 redirect and said, check out this page. And there are lots of different agencies in this instance hub. All of the agencies report to Data.gov. So this is only agencies reporting to Data.gov. Agencies that don't are not listed here.
By reporting Data.gov, you mean these are the agencies that in theory are supplying
So these
under
are
the
agencies that
presidential order to supply data.
sets. So there's 187 of them. As you can see, all these links actually here point to that agency. When they're clicked, you get the 303, you get the agency page.
So the link is actually to the URI, not the.
Because that's useful if people want to, or developers want to actually get that semantic data out. So now I'm going to show how that in fact works.
Is that like the, go back there. Is that actually the government's ugliest logo? That is just, but ugly.
So as far as getting the data out that's visible, I use wget, but you can really use any client where you can set a custom accept header. You probably presumably wouldn't use a web browser. And I send this request to, again, the agency page, and I'm asking for text turtle. Turtle is a very commonly used format for representing semantic RDF data. It's also very easy for humans to read.
So you're not sending to the agency page, you're sending it to the.
Agency. Agency page has the HTML representation. So I run that, and I can look at what I got back. And this is a turtle document. I won't bore you by reading through it all, but this is RDF. And anything that could read RDF or process it. A graph store could read this and learn about it. You can see here, we talk about this URI. So at this URI, narrower is all these properties. So these are sub-agencies. Up here, the name Health and Human Services is, in quotes, Department of Health and Human Services. Their home page is here, logo is here, Human Services, HHS. And this is what I talked about when I said FOF isn't very specific in what it means. FOF-NIC could mean a shorter name for someone, or it could also mean an abbreviation for an agency's name. It's very general. The Data.gov vocabulary might support things like short name or abbreviated name. People might call Health and Human Services HHS or Health and Human Services without the Department of. All those things could be incorporated into this data if Data.gov had a vocabulary, or even if they didn't, it could be incorporated as well, and it would aid in developers who have data sets that might refer to this idea, this Health and Human Services Department, with a name that's not the official name. So if you had a data set that said HHS and you want to convert it, this would allow you to reconcile that with the fact that that data set in fact talks about this Department of Health and Human Services. But if it said Health and Human Services without Department of, there would be no way to reconcile that.
Can you talk or speculate or riff on the fine line? So it's clear the value of the association of the URI with other known URIs and with metadata, descriptive metadata like the title or a nickname or whatever. But having a layer of having the sub-agencies also in there, how do you make it in designing an instance hub? How do you make a decision whether to have that sort of data in something like an instance hub versus doing a query on some data store and pulling that, asking for the sub-agencies or maintaining it somewhere else?
I think it's a choice you make depending on what you want to present. And I spoke to the developers at Data.gov, and we decided that we present that information. It's really your choice. I think this makes it easier because you don't have to run a query. You don't have to, running that query you would say, give me all things which are sub-agencies of the Department of Health and Human Services. And you could do that. I chose to do it this way. The HTML pages also present sub-agencies, so I thought it would be useful to present those as well in the RDF.
Well, that's a legitimate answer. It's likely that anyone that's building an app, like a mobile app or whatever, if they're trying to resolve metadata or whatever about Health and Human Services or a government agency, would also want sub-agency information right away, very efficiently. So it makes sense, and also made building your app extremely easy.
Mm-hmm. I can also get XML as RDF, which looks like this, and as well as JSON. JSON really wouldn't be always that useful to people. People working on semantic technology generally look for RDF or Turtle, but I put in there. It was a few lines of code more.
Yeah, but people build mashups.
Yep, and mashups are good. Things like Google Maps run off of JSON. And that's the JSON. It's pretty hard to read, but that encodes all that data in JSON. So that's the instance of. Does anyone have any questions or about functionality or about the instance of itself? Otherwise, I'm going to go on to So, how did I build it? Chris Musielek, the developer at Data.gov, gave me a SQL dump, an tab-separated format of some information about agencies. Not very much. Just to show you what that looks like. What is this? And with that, I got all this data in semantic formats. And I ended up with a semantic RDF document using a conversion of the data. So So in Google Refine, I linked parent agency names to their children agencies, child agencies. I created a scheme for what those URIs would look like. I acquired logos through Freebase. I linked what I had in Google Refine. And Google Refine is a tool, by the way, for working with and converting and enriching data in whatever format, tab separated, comma separated. You can just put data in there, and it's a really great power tool for working with data and enriching and cleaning it up. So I linked, using semantic technologies, what I had in Google Refine with Freebase, which is a service, a semantic service that was actually bought by Google for integration with their knowledge graph, but they still run it, and it's even patchier than Wikipedia in terms of coverage and common vocabulary for agencies. So I got agencies that were considered employers, agencies that were considered government agencies, military organizations, very patchy, very disparate. Some agencies just didn't come up at all. Some were incorrectly matched and paired by the tool Google provided. But I was able to actually get some logos out of Freebase. And I decided not to preserve the Freebase linkings that I had because they were so patchy and many of them were ultimately irrelevant. And those logos are housed in the Data.gov wiki, so they're hosted over at Data.gov. And I actually used Google Refine to, as I was telling John earlier, there was some, the way the image URIs were created at the MediaWiki was with MD5 hashes. Google Refine allowed me to calculate MD5 hashes and get them within the Google Refine system, so it's a very powerful tool. I used a converter tool from Data.gov, the CSV to RDF or LOD. It's a comma separated value to our resource description framework for linked open data tool. It's a command line tool that it works with Bash and Java and lets you run conversions and create rich RDF data out of CSV data. So this is perhaps the most important conversion I have. I'm not going to walk through all of this. Tim has given talks for how this works and how to use it. But you can see right here, we have this template for what these URIs should look like. It's the base, reference to Data.gov, ID, US Fed agency, and then we put on the parent name, and then this is a subject name. Put that there. The full organization. We say that this is a title, that it is an agency, and so forth. And the full document. And so much of this is done automatically by Tim's tool, and you kind of fill in exactly what ontologies you're going to use and what properties you're going to assign to what values in the CSV. Then I put the RDF file I had into Virtuoso, which is an open source graph store. It's a database for semantic data. It's not obviously a database like SQL is for tabular data, where a graph store stores a graph. A semantic data is. And then I ran my own local Apache web server, and I ran my own local Virtuoso instance. I had my own Sparkle endpoint to run queries against on my computer. I wrote this out in PHP, and it is pick it up and drop it on any server, and as long as you have an endpoint you can refer to, it will work. There's no Drupal or anything like that, and that was because it's kind of difficult in government to get something like this hosted contractor. Want to make it as portable as possible. So you can take this directory it's all housed in, and as long as you have an endpoint on your server or somewhere else you can point it at, it'll work. There's nothing to install otherwise. The architecture, as I mentioned, I wanted to make it very portable. So at RPI's page, there's regular expressions are used, and Apache kind of looks at the request page and then directs it appropriately to a script that will serve up semantic data. I actually had to use real literal files on a file system for each page. So when I go here, I have ID US Fed. So you can see that's the actual path. When I say ID US Fed, I'm referring to
The absolute opposite of using HT access.
Yeah, that's because we have contractors and they have security standards, and we didn't want to complicate it at all for them. So when I go to Broadcasting Board of Governors, that's really a file located at Data.gov, ID, US Fed, Agency, Broadcasting Board of Governors, index.php.
So, Alexei, so there's a lot of insight into. So, is this? just what was recommended to you? You figured out, you looked at the lay of the land and said, the only way this is going to work is if I do it this way?
So I talked to Chris Musielek, the developer at Data.gov, and we decided this would be the best way of doing it. Using a framework would make it a lot harder to get it installed. This thing, you can just pick up the Data.gov directory and drop it on any server, and as long as there's a Sparkle endpoint that's you can use and point it at, it'll run. And all these PHP files say are, they just require this script negotiation from the so all of them are the same. These were all generated by a script. They just wrote a little bash script to create all these directories. And then when I go to agency page, I require a content negotiation script. And if I go to agency page, that's the HTML representation. I have another page that serves up HTML representations of agencies. Content negotiation, I actually did this in PHP, and I was talking to Dominic. He wasn't even, you said you weren't even sure if that was a possible thing just to do it right in PHP there. It in fact is. There's no Apache web server configuration done for content negotiation. I just look at the accept header, this external, then I append a query, get the query, and spit out what's found. And also then if else, JSON, and finally at the bottom, if it's not one of those three, we replace the path in the directory, the agency page, and send the person, the user, with the 303 redirect to another page that has an HTML representation. Queries are stored in separate PHP files. This is kind of abstracts them away. So originally when I designed it, I had my queries were just really long escaped URLs, like 4 lines stretching across my screen length, going to the Sparkle endpoint and giving it all of this in a URL. I later talked to Dominic, and I decided that abstracting them away, as RPI does, is a much better solution. So when you go to a page, it sends a request to another PHP page that has this query here. And one of the arguments given to the PHP file is the agency's URI. And then this script assembles the proper query and returns it. So these queries can very easily be edited because when we say this PHP echo get agency, that's just the agency URI. So we can very easily add other things onto this query, and it's very portable. And this is what RPI uses. It also means we can reference this query from multiple pages. So if you have a whole entirely separate page that needs to get agency representations, they can use this same query by pointing at it on the file server rather than having it encoded on that page. So that means really if we added a new property to all the agencies, we'd rewrite the query once to get that property instead of multiple times across every page on the site. And we use construct queries to extract RDF. This is when we're doing content negotiation, as I showed over here, when we're getting out raw RDF data rather than a file to be parsed and spit in HTML. We use a construct query to get that data, which constructs an RDF piece of data rather than kind of a result of this query. And future improvements have been made. Again, we're going to quote link your data to the data for right context. That's 5-star data. That means linking my instance hub with DBpedia, with Freebase, with RPI. And that was something I didn't pursue this summer because of all the difficulty I had with Freebase and trying to learn these different technologies. But going forward, it's something I'm going to work on, and probably more actually at RPI.
So a specific example of that is the logos, rather than just linking to remote logos, which is actually what Dominic did with the instance hub. You snarfed them from Freebase and stuck them in the wiki.
Yeah, so my logos were hosted on the Data.gov wiki just out of interest of not having incorrect data at all, because this would be an authoritative instance hub. It probably wouldn't happen, but if someone somehow an obscene image up as an agency logo, Wikipedia didn't get caught, went over to Freebase, you couldn't have that coming from the US government. This way, we have control over what logos are presented. Dominic's instance of your RPI is kind of more casual and just grab to whatever DBpedia has as the current logo of the agency he's talking about. So that would be one example is maybe if agencies themselves released their logos in a semantic format, which is highly unlikely. If they ever did, we could just make a call over those agencies. They would probably use the Data.gov vocabulary. We could grab their logos and spit them out. While I was at the GSA, the General Services Administration, as an intern, there was a big initiative actually going on to make agencies have open APIs to get some of their data. And Data.gov was thinking about ways of hosting those API links to them. And that's just basic JSON APIs, just something out of a SQL database. So this is a long way off, that kind of linking, but linking with DBP to linking with Freebase, linking with RPI, it can be done today. Again, having a Data.gov vocabulary, presenting a little bit more metadata on the pages. As I mentioned earlier, linking with the data sets on Data.gov. As I also mentioned up here, getting data from agencies. And finally, something I just talked to Dominic today about, and we'll be working on as a part of my research project here, is moving this over to Alvaro Graves' loudspeaker technology, which is a very easy framework for doing this kind of data presentation. It's something I didn't use when it requires some installation, a little more configuration than just raw PHP. It's also a really great experience learning how all that works on the inside, writing my own redirects, things like that. Doing all that was a great experience, but loudspeaker is a really nice, easy kind of bootstrap that gets you all the way up to just kind of figure out what you want to present, not having to worry about all the content negotiation, all those other things. Thanks to Mr. Handler for connecting me with Data.gov. Mr. Handler kind of came up to me in the hallway one day and said, "How would you like to work at Data.gov?" I said, "That'd be great." And it was a great time. Dominic was invaluable in Skyping with him every couple days just to get some information about the next steps, what technologies should be used, what PHP functions are appropriate here and there. Tim Lebo for his CSV to RDF for LID tool. John for letting me do the first undergraduate Taylor's World talk and for helping
Ever in the world.
And final note, at the end of my presentation to Data.gov team, including the Data.gov director, he said, tell that Professor Hendler should send some more interns. So if this sounds interesting, and obviously if you're a PhD student, you'd be probably working at a much higher level than I was. If you are interested in Data.gov, talk to Professor Hendler. They want more RPI interns. I was the first ever intern from RPI, and I think the first ever intern to do a technical project with them. Previously, interns have just kind of done administrative tasks. But if you're interested in doing kind of this kind of researchy type work within the U.S. government, it's a great opportunity, and that's it. Talk to Professor Hendler. So, any questions?
Let's give you a hand. Questions for Alexei? Talk a little bit about your, this is your second internship that you've done.
So my second internship in DC. After my freshman year, I didn't really have a lot of technical knowledge or experience to get an internship with a tech company. So I ended up interning in the U.S. House of Representatives with Congressman Representative Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania. Representative Kelly was put on the Oversight of Government Reform Subcommittee on Technology Reform while having no knowledge of technology and having no interest in dealing with technology policy.
So he was GOP.
Yep. He said, "I don't know why I'm on here. I don't like technology." He's formerly a car dealer, and he said in his car business, he always stayed away from IT policy within the business. Professor Hughes, I'm sure could talk about managing of IT resources. He was very disinterested in that work and was somehow put as vice chairman of this committee. But he said to me, you know technology, why don't you do that work for me? So I got to attend a couple think tank sessions about cybersecurity. Met Vivek Kundra at the US CIO. Actually, this summer at the World Bank, I met his replacement, Todd Park. And Todd is CTO. I saw Stephen Rogel, the CIO, talk. And this summer I actually met Anish Chopra, the former CTO, along with Kundra at the State Department at a Data.gov press conference. But yeah, in the House of Representatives, I got to learn about the policy. I kind of focused on cybersecurity, as well as data center reform and kind of the IT side of government management, open government data, things like that. And being in DC again was really great, and getting to work on the technology side of things was really interesting. And Daryl Lisa, who was a close collaborator with Mike Kelly, who I was working for, was pushing a lot of initiatives in terms of open government data. So it was pretty interesting to see the policy side of promoting things like Data.gov, and then coming over and actually being there at Data.gov. I I should mention when I first came to RPI, I was a CS major solely, and in April, my senior year, I went over to the IT program, talked to Professor Hendler for 2 hours about Data.gov. I thought it was fascinating. I'd read about it in Wired magazine, and just talking to him about Data.gov really convinced me I kind of wanted to come to RPI and pursue a dual major. And little did I know, 2 years or 3 years later, I'd be working at Data.gov. It's awesome.
Except you got too much technical knowledge to make a contribution in Congress. So you
Any questions at all? No? Thank you.
Thank you very much.